About this morning is the Okavango Delta. And the intention of this very short little presentation is to just update everybody with what is an annual cycle for us in Botswana, and a very exciting cycle with regards to the headwaters of the Okavango Delta, which have come all the way from Angola, reaching Botswana itself. This happens every single year. It has happened since time immemorial like this. And for this year, it is a very exciting cycle in that we're having a higher flood year than we have in the previous years. So the Okavango Delta is actually located in northern Botswana. It is at the very distal end of what are the two main source rivers of the Okavango Delta. These rivers are named the Quito and the Okavango rivers. The Okavango Delta is also one of the few deltas in the world that isn't actually alongside an ocean. The Okavango Delta is an incredibly beautiful place. It is the 1000th UNESCO World Heritage Site, declared some over a decade ago, and it is comprised of a variety of incredible habitats. You have open riverine systems and channels that flow through it, open grasslands, you have forested riverine verges, and then there are also incredible lagoons and floodplains as well. These are just a selection of a few of the images. And the Okavango Delta, as a result of being this incredibly huge environment, supports a phenomenal plethora of wildlife. You've got a variety of water-adapted antelope, as well as terrestrial antelope that concentrate on the solid ground and not in the actual water itself. And all of this supports a very healthy population of predators as well. Suffice it to say, the Okavango Delta is akin to being the Garden of Eden. It is a complete paradise and makes it possibly the crown in Southern Africa's tourism crown from a wildlife perspective. One of the other things about the Okavango Delta, which is really fantastic, is they have these enormous heronries in certain locations, and they support over a few hundred different species of birds that are resident in the Okavango Delta, numbering more than 350 actually. And that goes up to over 400 and more species of birds when the migrants arrive. So where does all of this water come from? And how does this water actually arrive in the Okavango Delta? And the first thing to say about the water is that only 5% of the water that is inside the Okavango Delta comes out of the sky in Botswana. 95% of the water actually comes out of an area known as the Angolan highlands, or the B plateau. And these highlands are known as water towers. An enormous amount of rain falls in these areas from the months of September through to the end of March. And these waters then start to travel downstream into the Okavango Delta, which is more than 1,000 kilometers away or 600 miles away. The B plateau is also much higher than the Okavango Delta. It sits at around about 1,200 meters, or around about 3,600 feet. And this is the area that is highlighted where the B plateau is and where the main source waters for the Okavango Delta are located. So looking at these highlands and looking at it from the south where the Okavango Delta is, there are two main rivers that feed the Okavango Delta. As I mentioned earlier, there is the Quito River. The Quito River is actually in the east of this image, and in the west of this image is the Okavango River. Now, both of these rivers are actually on flow over two different substrates, and this is what results in the Okavango Delta having two pulses. Two pulses meaning the water from the Okavango arrives at one point and the water from the Quito arrives a little bit later. So the reason for that is because the Okavango River is located on firmer soils, rockier substrate, which is also steeper. And so the waters flow more quickly down into the Okavango Delta over that 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles I mentioned earlier on. The Quito River is the river that is located more in marshier areas as well as on less steep ground. And so the water from the Quito River drains more slowly out of the highlands and into the Okavango Delta. And actually, the Quito River is the river that provides most of the perennial water that comes into the Okavango Delta. Over the years, the Okavango Delta has flooded in a variety of different ways. It never seems to flow on exactly the same area as it did the year before. And because the area of the Okavango is very tectonically active, fault lines change, earthquakes happen deep underground that are not really felt on the surface. And these little changes result in the water flowing in different directions. So if you look at the 1880s, the very left-hand side image of this slide, you'll see that most of the waters from the Okavango Delta were flowing down the western side of Chiefs Island, the western side of the delta itself. The 1880s to the 1930s, it flowed more down the east, and then from the 1930s to present, it flowed mostly down the east and the central parts of the delta itself. Looking a little bit more recently at what has happened in the flooding in the last few years, certainly from 2015 to 2020, what you can see in the top left of the image is that in 2015, we were very blessed with a very beautiful big flood, and that flood inundated both the east and the west of the Okavango Delta, east and west of Chiefs Island itself. 2016, there was a much slower and smaller flood that came in. And the driest year on record actually was 2019. You can see that in the bottom left. The wettest year on record was actually in 2011. So looking a little bit more into what has happened over the last 4 years or 4 cycles of the Okavango Delta, what you can see in this graph over here is the water levels as the months passed in the Okavango over the years. And what's really clear about this image is that for the last 4 years, the water levels have actually been a lot lower than what they currently are. The last time we had a flood that was very similarly in size to what this year's flood was back in 2019, which was a nice big flood as well. We've been very blessed this year with a very good rainy season, and the highlands in the Angolan highlands, in the B plateau, have also been blessed with a very good rainfall season as well. And what you can see in this image in the 2 pink lines over there are the 2 pulses from each of those 2 rivers that I was speaking about a little bit earlier on. The first pulse, which arrived at this measuring point in March, is the Kubango River. And the pulse now, which is the larger pulse that is coming through, which sustains us all the way through the dry season, has started arriving in the northern parts of the Okavango Delta as we speak right now. And what you can see in the red line over here, which is this year's flood graph, you can see that we're in for a really nice year. So to illustrate this and to talk more specifically about what is going to be happening at the Ker Downey properties and to illustrate some differences between the east and the west of the delta, it is broadly expected that much of the water will still be flowing in the eastern northern side of the Okavango Delta, on the north of Chiefs Island, and less of the water will flow down the western side of Chiefs Island. Kanana is a camp that is located in the west of the Okavango Delta, west of Chiefs Island itself, and it is an extremely beautiful area comprised of islands and riverine forests, grasslands and floodplains that are seasonally inundated. So what we suspect will probably happen in the Kanana concession with the second pulse that is arriving now is that many of the floodplains that are surrounding the camp, and if you look at this image, you can see Kanana clearly indicated on the map itself, and you'll see the floodplains surrounding the camp. These floodplains should all fill up slowly but surely with water that will come in. The main channel that is flowing close to camp over there will offer sufficient water to allow for boating. That should start at the end of June, and we expect for that to continue all the way through to the end of September. And we will certainly have fantastic makoro. But what will happen in the area is that wildlife will condense and converge onto the islands themselves, especially the terrestrial wildlife, and then also the water-adapted wildlife will more or less hug the edges of the floodplain areas as well. What that could mean is that certain game drive areas could be a little bit more restricted in the west over here, but we do not expect a large inundation of water that will really restrict game viewing too much. This is a view of what those floodplains look like outside the front of camp. Looking across at Shindy in comparison, now you can see Chiefs Island is to the west of the image, to the right, to the left-hand side of the image over here. The second pulse from the Quito River is actually arriving now in this area as well. However, what must be said is that the main channel, the Monachira channel, is quite full with water. And this water will push out into the floodplain areas, and it will restrict the game viewing more than what it will in the west. Because most of the water is flowing down this side of the Okavango Delta as opposed to the west, it means that the floodplain areas will be more inundated than we have had in the last 4 years. This means that boating and Makoro activities will become more prevalent, and we'll be able to explore more widely on these craft. And the game driving will become more restricted to the island areas where we have access to as well. What must be stressed is that this is an incredible time. It is something that everybody celebrates in the Okavango Delta because it means that the habitats will be vibrant, the wildlife will be flourishing, and it really is something that brings incredible nutrients into the Delta that